In this part of the course, we'll be seeing how we could have many-to-many relationships between two tables. And so we'll be seeing that using our previous example in flights. And so till now, we've had the ability to have flights and airport models or tables. And now let's go ahead and add, aside from these flights and airports, to have um, passengers to add to our flights as well. And to be able to present these passengers that might actually be on these flights too. So we can add all the passengers, the ones that are on the flight and those that are not on those flights. And so this passengers model or table is going to have a many to many relationship with our flights, and we're going to see that and explain why. So, inside of my models.py, in addition to an airport and a flight class, I'm going to create a class called passengers. So, class passenger, and of course, we're going to make it a model. So, models.model, and so this passenger, of course, is going to have a first name. So, first name, and that first name is going to be a model, of course, dot, so char field, character field, and of course F is capital, and let's give it a maximum length of, let's say, 60. So 60. And it's the same for our last name. So models dot char field with a maximum length, and that max length is 60. And so passengers also, as we described, must have a many-to-many relationship with flights. That a flight could have multiple passengers. A passenger could be on multiple flights, and ultimately we need an additional table to keep track of this. But we can think a little bit more abstractly here in Django and just say that every passenger has flights associated with them, which are a and so here passenger, sorry, flights. So every flights have passengers inside of it. So in order to describe that relation, I'm going to type in models dot many to many relationship. And so in order to use this relationship, I'm going to be adding a many to many field. And so this relationship is going to be between my passenger class and my flight. So I'm be adding as an argument the flight, which I want this class to be in relation with, and let's give it a blank equal true, meaning that it's not going to give me an error if a particular passenger doesn't have a flight. And we'll also give this a related name. So related name, which is passengers. So let's just fix this. So capital T. And so now we gave it a related name of passengers, meaning that if I have a passenger, I can use that flight attribute to access all of their flights. So all of the flights of the passenger, I'm going to access them using that flights variable. And likewise, if I have a flight, I can use that passenger's related name to access all the passengers that are on that flight. And we'll see how that will be useful in a moment. Now, let's add a string representation to this class also. So the string representation is begins by writing the definition, followed by str, and then self, which is the passenger object. And let's return a string, a formatted string, of course, with the passenger's first name and last name. So self.first name, and then space self.last name, and close that, which is a reasonable way to represent a particular passenger. And now I need to apply these changes. And remember, in order to apply these changes, we need to have two steps because we did something to our models, so we need to update the database. So what we do is, and before we add that, we can see that we have an attribute error. So module has no attribute many-to-many field, and this has to be a capital T. And let's go ahead and save that, and now we can continue. So you can see that the error has been removed. Now, in order to update our database, as I said, we have to have two steps. The first is Python manage.py run server, make migrations. So go ahead and detect these changes. So I created a new model, and now let's apply these updates to our database. So Python manage.py migrate, as in apply these changes that I've just made. So migrate, and you can see that everything was successful, and I've applied those to an actual database. And if I go now to admin.py, let's go ahead and add, aside from having an airport and a flight, let's register also a passenger. So of course I need to import it from models and add it to that argument of register. So passenger. So let's go ahead and save that. And now this, what I just did here made me, via the admin interface, to manipulate passengers as well. I can now go ahead and run my server and type in Python manage.py run server and click on enter. And now let's go ahead to my page, and now let's not go to /flights but /admin, and I've already logged in, so I don't need to add my credentials again. And now you can see here that I have an additional row inside of flights, which flights is the name of my application. So I'm going to go and add passengers. So let's say I'm adding a first name, which is Tobias, and last name, which is Eden. And let's go ahead and save and add another. And you can see that Django did not give me an error because I didn't specify which flight these passengers are on, because I said we added an attribute which is blank equals to true, which makes it acceptable to leave it blank. So let's add Tris prior to, and save and add another, and let's say Caleb prior, and save. So you can see now that I have these passengers that all exist in Django's admin interface. And now what I'd like to do is, on my flight page, display information about which passenger happens to be on any given flight. And so before that, let's just add some passengers to some flights. So let's say Tobias Eden is on flight 2. I'm just going to add that, save, and now let's just go to passengers, see Tobias Eden, and you can see that he has one flight from Dubai to New York. Now let's see how we can add those information to our web page. So here, when I go to flights, and in order to do so, I'm going to go to views.py first, and inside of views.py, aside from giving access to that flight object, I'm going to give access to all the passengers that are on that flight. And to do so, I'm going to create a variable, let's call it passengers, and I'm going to type in flight dot passengers dot all. And the reason we can do this is because passengers right here is the related name, which is here, that here. So using that related name, we can access all the passengers that are on a specific flight. And so now I'm going to save that, and inside of my flight.html, I'm going to add some additional information, which is, let's first write a heading, type in passengers, and what I'm going to do is, let's say, create a loop, so a for loop, and so for every passenger inside of my passengers variable that I've just passed in to that flight.html, so which is passengers, which is right here, which is a list of passengers, I'm going to go ahead and so let's go ahead first and create an unordered list, and inside of that unordered list I'll be looping over every passenger in passengers. So, and for every passenger inside of my passengers list, I'm going to put that passenger inside of a list item, so passenger, and the moment I write that, what's going to be printed here is that string representation of passenger, which is here. So it's going to print for me his first and his last name. So let's go ahead and let's say that if I don't have any passengers, so if empty, let's just go ahead and type it. So if empty, I'm going to add, let's say, a list item that has no passengers. So inside of here, I'll be creating a list item, no passengers. And let's go ahead and save that. So now, if I go back to my page and let's go to /1, I can see that now flight 1 has this information about that flight, and along with the passengers, and you can see that this flight till now has no passengers, and so it gave me no passengers. So let's go ahead and check in 2, and you can see that Tobias Eden is a passenger on flight 2, and you can see that it's going annoying that I have to do everything using that URL to go back and forth between pages. I can link these pages if I want to, and that way I might do that is, that's on the flight page. So on that flight.html, I'm going to add a link that links me to my main page, and I can add a URL, and this URL is called index. So it's going to get me back to the index page, and let's call it back to flights, and that will get me to that index.html. And likewise, I'd like to, whenever I click on the flights, I'd like to go to see the information about that flight, and in order to do that, I'm going to add a link to each of these flights, and that's going to be here. And so this is going to take me to the URL, which is flight, and let's just go ahead and write that URL for flight. And you can notice that inside of our flight path, which is in urls.py, which is right here, you can see that that path takes as an argument an integer. And so here inside of index, whenever I want to call that URL, I want Django won't know which flight do we mean by. So a flight of ID 1, 2, and 3, and so we have to specify what ID. And in order to do that, I need to specify the parameter here. So I already have the flight, and I can access that flight's ID by typing in flight.id. And so now all I have to do is just save that, and let's go ahead and refresh our page and go to flights. And so now you can see that I have a list of flights where every flight in fact is a link, which will take me to a new page. Now if I click on any of those links, let's say New York to London, I am taken to that flight, and I have information about that flight and the passengers inside of that flight as well. And now if I go back to flights, and I am back to that main page. And so this is one way of having to use these many relations to use other tables.